This is Steve Cochran, and this is my last word for now on election 2024. What we've seen is not okay, and we need to take the presidency back. We need to raise the standard of the office and the person who is privileged to sit in it. And while most but not all have made up their minds on the election, there's still many who need to know the facts and truth of where we are today before they vote. Maybe that's even you. So these are the facts, and these facts matter. The powers of the presidency are limited, part of the brilliance of our founding fathers, to make sure a dictator would not be the president of the United States. However, while the powers of the president may be limited, they are immense. The damage the president can do is even greater, because the damage a president can do is unlimited. That's why any president of the United States has to be responsible, careful, think of the country, think of the people first, and act accordingly. Now, this should frighten all of you, because we are at a fork in the road right now, and that danger, that unlimited danger, is real. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to offer you an endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. I don't know if she's going to be a good president or a great president or even a bad president if she wins. This is not an endorsement. This is an indictment of President Trump. Now, I guess that's what, number 5? On January 20th, only one person can take the oath of office for the sake of all of us, for your families, for your kids, for your grandkids, for everybody you know. That person cannot be Donald Trump again. The oath that's taken reads, "I do solemnly swear I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." Now, those words are about America. They're not about the president. They're not about a single person in that office, because the office is bigger than any man or woman who might occupy it. That's why it works. That's why it's been the envy of the world until Trump. See, because he never got it. And what's worse is he never tried to. So I've assembled a list of disqualifiers. And believe me, when it comes to Donald Trump, the things that should have disqualified him from even being in the conversation is a very, very, very long list. Somehow I've boiled it down to 12. In a normal world, individually, each of these would have ended any candidate's run. Collectively, these dozen items ought to be enough to forever banish Trump to some uninhabitable spot that nobody should ever go to, like Mar-a-Lago. Now, each of these items is based in fact and truth. The same truths I've been telling since Trump came down that escalator in 2015. So let's begin. The 12 disqualifiers of Donald Trump as president. It's not dementia. He's just weird. Trump has always done ridiculous long rallies, endless non sequiturs mixed with constant bragging and tired, whiny rants about how badly he's treated. Aren't you tired of getting up in the morning and feeling like you're in a fist fight? Well, how about 4 more years of that? But it's even gotten more odd lately. The more obvious example would be his rally where he just stopped answering questions and told his DJ to play music, and he started dancing. And it went on for 30 minutes. Now, if you didn't see it, congratulations, because it's even worse than it sounds. And it's just part of the evidence that he is losing it at a level we haven't even seen. Number 11, disqualifier number 11. He's dangerously dumb. He doesn't understand what tariffs are and what they do to the economy. He's admitted not knowing what NATO does and why it matters so much. Oh, and you know what? I can boil it down to one word: bleach. You cannot have a dumb president of the United States. Dumb plus the most power in the world, well, that's not going to end well. As a matter of fact, if Dean Wormer from Animal House were still alive, he'd probably say, fat, dumb, and drunk with power is no way to go through life, Don. Number 10, he is the immigration problem. Nope, Mexico didn't pay for the wall. Yes, we have a huge immigration problem. And Biden had failed, as did Republicans and Democrats going all the way back to Reagan. But Trump stopped the first significant border bill because he wanted this to be a campaign issue. Hear that. He, as a leader, didn't want to solve the problem. He wanted the problem to continue so he could use it. There was a bill that was negotiated and pushed to conclusion by a very conservative senator named James Lankford. Worked for months on it. It wouldn't have fixed everything, but it was a huge step forward, and Trump killed it so he could say Biden and Harris failed the border. Number 9, he trashes our institutions. Donald Trump has dumped on the media nonstop. He slammed the FBI. He slammed our intelligence agencies since he took office. He's taken Putin's side over the finest security minds in the world, ours. He's also viciously attacked the courts. More specifically, he blasts judges who hold him accountable. You know, like he's subject to the same rules that we are. Imagine that. Most offensively, he's called our war dead losers. He said the wounded should be hidden from view. And he said Senator John McCain was not a hero because he got caught. Well, it's strong words from a coward who happily took 5 draft deferments, partly with a fake diagnosis of bone spurs in his foot, arranged by his father and an alleged doctor. Number 8, the number 8 disqualifier. His incredible unpresidential behavior. You know, this juvenile name calling is just sad. The public cursing in front of families and kids, it's terrible. But really, nothing's worse than the grift. When you get power and you exploit that power financially. It may not be illegal on a case-by-case basis, but shaking down regular Americans for campaign donations he gets to use for himself, well, that ought to be. He has no shame, never has, and it shows with this long list of Trump products he's hawking, so he can make more money for personal spending. Like gold sneakers. Products actually featuring his mugshot. Superhero cards featuring Trump dressed like an astronaut or a cowboy or a Superman type character. Trump cologne and perfume. I'm guessing they have just a scent, just a tad bit of orange, citrus, if you will. And how about Trump Bibles? Did you know those are made in China? A nonpartisan firm estimated the Trump family, including him, made or took in more than $640 million just in his first term. You can imagine what it's going to be like in his second if he wins. There's unwritten rules about how former presidents should behave, and the former presidents have adhered to those. They're laid out in a great book, partly authored by Nancy Gibbs, who was the managing editor at Time magazine for a long time. The book's called The President's Club. I'd highly recommend it. Trump, by the way, has blown off all of those rules because he has no honor and no respect for the office. Number 7 on the long list of disqualifiers of Trump being president again. The lies. He lies like he breathes heavily and often. He wasn't a good student, but he did learn a lot from one very bad man, the legendary Roy Cohn, who was Joseph McCarthy's right hand during the Red Scare of the 50s. Cohn had 3 rules that he taught Trump. Attack, attack, attack. Admit nothing and deny everything. And no matter what, claim you won and never admit defeat. Sound familiar? The Washington Post actually documented over 30,000 Trump lies in his first term. He's averaging more than 50 a day in his campaign. He lies constantly and without any remorse. Some of the best psychological minds in America have said he's a malignant narcissist, a sociopath, and an absolute danger. Think about it. It's simple here. Do you know anyone else who never laughs? Has no obvious friends? That whirring sound you hear, that's Freud spinning in his grave. The number 6 disqualifier, Trump loves dictators. He's always seen himself as a tough guy. He's not, never has been. Yet his love of the thug life has shown up that he truly wants to be a dictator, and he's going to act like one if he wins. Now, the danger here is bigger than his little fantasy. He's easily manipulated, and he thinks creeps like Kim Jong-un just love him. If he hasn't already given secrets to Putin, he likely will. Think about that. And remember, if Trump wins, no guardrails. Second term, he's never going to run again. And he will act in his interests only. You won't have the strong cabinet he had in his first administration. He's going to surround himself for people who will say yes to him, and they'll jump as high as he tells them to jump. Those people, by the way, will do his job. He never wanted the job. He just wanted what came with the job. The people he puts around him, they'll shape policy. They'll drive his agenda. Project 2025 is just a start. Recently he even said RFK Jr. would be put in control of Health and Human Services and the USDA. That's the no vaccine, I've got a brainworm, I left a bear carcass in Central Park, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Yeah, that guy. Number 5, he's a bully. Donald Trump's mean. He shows it daily in how he talks about women and migrants, the disabled, and more. You remember he fired James Comey, who was the FBI director, for not ending his investigation into him, into Trump. The Justice Department doesn't work for the White House, never supposed to. It's supposed to be independent. He also got rid of whistleblowers for telling the truth about Trump's behavior. And Trump mocked dead politicians who stood up to him, including Senator John McCain, who I promise he never would have had the courage to do to his face. Trump's lies about migrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio, caused death threats and closed schools. His lies about FEMA support to storm-ravaged North Carolina halted aid workers. They got death threats. They couldn't do their jobs, and victims suffered. And in both cases, the Republican representatives in Ohio and North Carolina said Trump's wrong, that the Biden folks worked with them, that there was no eating of pets going on. He didn't care. The number 4 disqualifier, he's a convicted felon. Trump was found guilty of falsifying business records in the New York hush money trial. 34 felony count convictions. That's just part of the story. He lost a huge judgment with an amended verdict of millions of dollars owed to the writer E. Jean Carroll. Even after his sexual abuse/rape conviction, he continued to trash her. Trump still got to stand trial in Georgia for trying to fix that state's election. He's had his lawyers play games and shift focus. The prosecutors, the romantic relationship with her top attorney became the brakes on the trial that stopped it down. That charge has nothing to do with Trump's guilt or innocence, but that's the thing you need to know. None of these are about Trump proving he's innocent. They're all about just stretching it out until it's no longer an issue for him. The most serious of all these cases is the January 6th insurrection trial, if there ever is one. This too has been stalled by constant legal maneuvering. And Donald Trump won't try to prove himself innocent. He'll simply pay for more attorneys to look for loopholes to grind it to a halt. The number 3 disqualifier, bad management kills. Multiple experts agree that Trump's horrific management of the pandemic cost thousands of lives. If he had asked us to come together and follow medical advice as we knew it at the time, many people would not have died. Multiple independent health commissioners said of the 400,000 people that died while he was in office, at least 40% could have been saved. That's 160,000 Americans. But there was no crisis management from the Trump team. As a matter of fact, they got rid of the pandemic team before COVID hit. And Trump was mostly concerned about his, quote, numbers. He constantly said we should stop testing. We should test less so he looks better. He said it out loud. If he had just taken the time to socially distance and to urge us to do the same, and yeah, wear masks, it would have and could have helped. If he'd been a leader who worked with governors and not against them, and worked with schools and not against them, lives would have been saved. Trump's pandemic incompetence can never be forgiven because it never had to be so bad. And 160,000 Americans and the people they love know that pain. Number 2, the number 2 disqualifier, he lost the election and he knows it. Trump's election denial and his ongoing refusal to concede to Biden was unprecedented. Multiple sources have said Trump has admitted behind closed doors that he lost, but he'll never admit it publicly. Remember, Roy Cohn? Deny, no matter what, claim you won. His court challenges failed. State election officials said there's nothing to see here. There was no fraud. And keep in mind, Trump only challenged results in states that he lost. If he truly believed the election was rigged, well, why would he run again? The infrastructure didn't change. If the system was broken, why even get back in the race? And the number one disqualifier? January 6th. The ultimate act of treason. Trump used social media and every microphone and camera he could find to crank up his most crazed followers to come to D.C. to stop the certification of Joe Biden's win. It didn't matter that he wasn't one of the rioters. They were there because they were following his marching orders, and it took him hours before he finally spoke to them and told them to leave. That mob would have killed his vice president and Speaker Pelosi as well if they could have gotten to him. And even though he knew the hang Mike Pence chants were going on, he did nothing for hours. It was the worst attack on our capital since the War of 1812. That attack was by our enemy, the Brits, in a war. This attack was by Americans to serve Donald Trump. He lit that flame. He deserves the blame. Now, for these 12 and so many other reasons, Donald Trump must go. If you're a true conservative and care about the future of the Republican Party, it's the only way to save it. And the most important office in the world is not a means to his ends. It's not there to serve his needs. There's 346 million Americans who need a president to work for them and not just serve one American. See, because in his mind, the presidency does exist to serve the needs of Donald Trump. He only wants to be president to exploit the job for personal and financial gain, for his ego, and for legal protection. And that's why if he wins, he is very likely to do any of the following, if not all of them and more. Pardon himself pending more legal challenges. Deport migrants by the thousands, no matter what it costs, and open internment camps. Criminally prosecute his perceived enemies. Destroy any or all media critics. Use soldiers against citizens on our streets if they protest against him. Abandon our allies and give up Ukraine to Putin as fast as he can. Continue to play politics with disasters. And punish women and healthcare professionals with possible prison time even over their own reproductive rights. If you still need convincing, read the words of those who served most closely with him while he was in the White House, including Vice President Pence, who said, anybody who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. General John Kelly was his chief of staff, said he's unhinged and an idiot. General James Mattis ran the Defense Department for Trump, said Trump has the understanding of a fifth or sixth grader. His national security advisor, John Bolton, said, to be a fascist, you have to have a philosophy. Trump's not capable of that. He hasn't got the brains to be a dictator. Trump's Secretary of State was Rex Tillerson. He said Trump's understanding of global events, his understanding of global history, his understanding of U.S. history is really limited. Said it's hard to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't even understand the concept of why we're talking about it. Tillerson said he's a moron. Homeland Security Director Tom Bossert, the president undermined American democracy baselessly for months. As a result, he's culpable for the siege of January 6th, and he is an utter disgrace. His national security advisor was H.R. McMaster, who said Trump, he's a dope. His economic advisor, Gary Cohn, said, quote, he's dumb as shit. And his attorney general, Bill Barr, said he's like a 9-year-old, a defiant 9-year-old who's always pushing the glass towards the edge of the table, defying his parents to stop him. He said he's very petty. He'll always put his interests ahead of the country, the gratification of his ego ahead of the country. He said, Barr did, but our country cannot be a therapy session for someone as troubled as he is. So I'm going to end where I began. This is not an endorsement of Kamala Harris. She may well be a great president, or maybe a very good one. You know what? She might even be bad at the job. But what we don't yet know about her, we do know about Donald Trump. Harris can do a mere fraction of harm to this country compared to the mountain of damage Trump will do in a second term, including the stuff he has said out loud he will do. In 2016, there was a landslide of hatred towards Hillary Clinton, a lot of it irrational. She was one of the most qualified candidates ever for the White House, but there had been a lot of white water under the bridge. And she made it worse by running a terrible campaign. Slogan there could have been, hey, it's my turn. Could have put that on a hat. But even though she was qualified, America wasn't having it. How many people came up to you and said, you know what, I'm done with the Clintons. Let's try him. So in 2016, let's be honest, Trump didn't win. She lost. That vote was not for him. It was against her. And this time, the roles are reversed. I believe this vote will be won against Trump, not for Harris. And I believe she will win. That means Trump will keep up his streak as the loser he is. But here's the good news. What ails America is curable, but nothing gets fixed without you. Remember, a campaign is a job interview, the biggest job interview. Let me ask, who are you going to hire? The one who could ruin your business? Or the one who won't and just might be good or great? I want to thank you for voting if you already have, or thank you in advance if you haven't. And I really hope you'll share this with everyone who's willing to listen. And speaking of listening, I hope you'll check out and subscribe to the podcast live from my office, wherever you get your podcasts, to hear thoughts like this, to hear great guests, and most of the time to hear things that are way more fun. I thank you for listening, and I ask you to stick around because there's more to come on Live from my office. Now go vote. We want to thank our partners at the Rao Center for the Performing Arts in Crystal Lake. This New Year's Eve, we are back again for New Year's Eve for people that can't stay awake until dinner. New Year's Eve for people that can't stay awake until their last dose of meds. It's a 2:00 afternoon show. Everybody seems to love the idea. And then you can go out and have your wacky, crazy fun. But I want to remind you about something. Local theaters are important to the communities they're in, but they're important to the rest of us as well. And Rouse Center for the Arts has a significant problem right now. There's a building ownership issue, or a dispute, if you will. And regular funding on state and local levels is held up because of it. So if you can, along with picking up your tickets for New Year's Eve, give them a couple of bucks. You can donate right on the website where you buy the tickets. And it's important. Certainly, if you're in Crystal Lake, you know how much the Rouse Center means to you. If you're in Northern Illinois, for that matter, or on the Wisconsin border, you know that. But it's a great theater with great people, and we hope you'll help if you can. And get your tickets as well for New Year's Eve. It's a Rao Center, and we love it. That's all. RaoCenter.org. Spell it R-A-U-E Center.org. RaoCenter.org. And thank you.
Okay, so here's the first thing I want to ask you about. I don't want to leave out how this conversation has shifted in the media landscape and how we consume politics. So thinking about over the course of your career, are you able to identify a few different mile markers on when we went from Walter Cronkite saying that's the way it is to today's kind of incredibly polarized echo chamber environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a timeline, and it can get to be a long timeline, but the stuff that jumps out is pretty stark in nature. Cronkite and Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson decides not to run for a second term, a second elected term. Remember, he finished Kennedy's first term and he was eligible for 2 full terms. Everybody thought he was going to run in 1968. He decided not to, didn't tell anybody, just made the announcement because he felt he had lost Cronkite, because Walter Cronkite went on the air on the most important newscast in the world and said to America that we were losing Vietnam and we couldn't win. And the quote from Johnson from LBJ was, I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the presidency. Not exactly those words, but that was the motivation for him to step out. Then you fast forward to Nixon. Nixon turns out to be a crook, even though he liked to say he wasn't. In fact, he was. And when Nixon was a crook, we were shocked. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the presidency was special, the way I feel it should be now. So to have the president of the United States be accused of, and ultimately clearly he was guilty of trying to suppress a criminal act, was shocking. Sure. And there was a little bit of growing up that America had to do, but it pulled the lid off the presidency. You follow that up with Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon. That was shocking because everybody felt that the standard should be upheld. And if you commit a crime, you should do the time. So that was a punch in the gut, the political gut, the trust of America. Ronald Reagan sweeps in as a very effective and successful 8 years, but you could argue at the expense of a lot of people as well.
Sure.
And at the expense of Jimmy Carter. You fast forward into George H.W. Bush losing to Bill Clinton, largely because of Ross Perot and America's desperation to have a third party, and that was 30 years ago. But the biggest touch points in the last 30 years, in your lifetime, were Clinton and Lewinsky, and the push for Republicans saying they're right, the left is wrong, followed up with 9/11, the last time the country was truly unified, and it didn't last very long. Followed up with the Democrats going after the war effort and the Republicans going after the Democrats. Barack Obama's elected in 2008. I cried because, the idea that we would elect a black man in my lifetime was crazy.
Yeah.
So it was a great thing. He ends up having a somewhat ineffective presidency because when he controlled both houses, he was a little too far to the left trying to find his footing. And when he didn't, he was blocked by Mitch McConnell and, frankly, a whole lot of racists in Congress. And then, of course, you've got Donald Trump and Biden, and those stories have been told. All of it adds up to something that can be fixed and should be fixed. And I go back to Clinton on this. Clinton has a quote that is absolutely true. Whatever's wrong with America can be fixed by what's right with America.
Sure.
But the longer we go without fixing it, the harder it is to fix it. So, I get it. Everybody's scared. A lot of folks are panicked. I guess I'm more sad than panicked or scared because we're too good a country to be in this position.
Sure.
But we can make a change, and we must. So I know it's a long answer, but those are kind of the touch points.
No, it makes sense. And the thing that stands out to me about each of the kind of moments you're unpacking there is the way in which the media environment around it changes. So thinking about how there was a time not that long ago within your lifetime where a president lost a newscaster and made the decision not to seek reelection. And now I think about how there are so many loud voices who not only never want a particular ideological side to be represented, but are actively working to suppress the viewpoints of that ideological side. And many folks wind up existing in these kind of echo chambers. I'm curious, you have this 40-year career in radio where you watch how that specific media landscape changed, where you're able to have this mass influence that as the industry began to, my words, not yours, destroy itself, that level of mass influence changed. I'm curious how you viewed the ability to shape public opinion from behind a microphone, because I think when I compare the media world to the church world, there's a lot of commonality between trying to create a sense of mass influence and sort of losing the thread because you get wrapped up into your own ideology rather than the public service of preaching for the greater good, or in your case, hosting a show.
Yeah, well, you make a great point. And the confluence of the start of Fox News and the beginning of social media and what it's turned into has completely kicked the impact of media in the shins. The founding fathers designed the Constitution of the country based on the fifth estate, the fifth estate being journalism en masse to keep an eye on politicians so they would not become corrupt. Sure. They would not become dictators. So Fox News comes in, preaches only the right is right and everything else is wrong. Social media comes in and says, okay, have at it. You have total free speech. Say anything you want. The left overreacts to the right. The right overreacts to the left, and it snowballs downhill in a really destructive way. In the meantime, the perfect storm of newspapers going away creates this vacuum in the same way that radio is going away now, where you don't have local journalism. You don't have local newspapers. You don't have local radio stations. So the local races don't get covered. The local politicians don't get covered. And local news goes away. So you leave it to mom and dad and your aunt, your uncle, to go, hey, guess what I read on Facebook today?
Sure.
When journalism matters, and journalism and ethics matter. And people don't want to hear this, but ethics still control the major legitimate news outlets. You might not like what the New York Times writes, but there are floors of attorneys who make sure that it's fact-based.
Right.
And it's checked by lawyers. The same thing at the major news networks as well. But the news networks are beholden to sponsors. They need ratings. So in prime time, they have opinion program after opinion program that are not news. So I don't blame anybody for being confused. The general public living their life, going to work, taking care of their family, there's no way they can understand what's real and what's not real. And that's the scary thing to me when you take the genie out of the bottle when it comes to what's news, what isn't news. And frankly, you top it off with, Trump using this fake news thing to his dark advantage. You really blow a hole in fair coverage and truthful coverage of the news. I don't know how we fix it at this point.
Sure.
But we have to. It's crucial.
So there's an interesting thing that brings up for me, because I've said this to you, I've said this to other people talking about your career. The thing that there was two distinctions for me about your career. One was you evolved. The same host in 2024 was not the host in 1984. And those you came up with didn't do that because they were able to still make money doing the same act that they had done for years and years and years. The other thing, though, that I think is more pertinent to what we're talking about is you would go from a very substantive, serious conversation to complete nonsense and then back to serious conversation. And one of the things that stands out to me is you were able to do what essentially amounts to an opinion show. I want to be clear about the qualification here. You are not a journalist, and therefore you're hosting a talk show that is comprised of some journalists, comprised of some opinion folks you're being a guest, and you are trying to host a natural conversation between people who sometimes don't necessarily agree and sometimes people who really disagree intensely. What makes the folks who are doing opinion shows now, particularly on cable news, different than what you've done on the radio for all those years? Because I don't get the impression that people turned into you thinking that you were a journalist, the way that people turned into cable news thinking that those guys are journalists when they're not.
Yeah, and I think some of that is labels, right? I mean, all the years I did on WGN, a gigantic station, big labels, lots of responsibility. And if I said something that people disagreed with, they would scold me in whatever the form of communication was in the day. Hey, you have a lot of responsibility. You have a lot of thump. It's very risky to say the things you're saying. Why are you saying them? Well, I can tell you what I believe you know to be true. I have never in my life lied on a microphone about something that was a matter of politics.
Sure.
I've never lied because it's too important. Now, I've made mistakes, and when I've made mistakes, I've corrected them. But the difference is there is active lying going on by both parties. I'm not saying it's equal, and I'm not saying that you need to blame one over the other. I'm saying it's not okay. Because the lying that goes on to secure your job, whatever your job is, whether it's primetime news network stuff or a seat in Congress, it's just wrong.
Sure.
And I gave up my job on a couple of occasions because I don't like bullies. And bullies are bad in any way, shape, or form, whether it's a kid at school or grown-ups, and certainly in politics, it's the absolute worst. And that's kind of what we face now. And you got to be able to stand up to the bullies. Because, look, the bottom line here, I think, is we need to get to a point where we understand the vast majority of this country is good. Not dark, not bad, good. It's a beautiful sky as you're recording this, beautiful blue sky. I meet people. I don't know what their politics are. I went in to get a COVID shot and a flu shot. We don't discuss politics. It's how's your day? How's your day? And, I saw a couple of cute little kids I'm a soft touch for cute little kids, which you're aware of.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation about the Hulk. That's what America is. America is all the cliches. It's a land of opportunity where you can achieve to the highest level of your abilities, your dreams, your drive, and your desire. And I think what people are depressed about and frightened about is they believe that we're entering an era, if we're not already in the middle of it, where politicians are trying to tamp that down. And to what end? I mean, I've said that forever. If you hold your breath on the right or the left, and you go, I want everybody to be a Republican, and I want everybody to be a Democrat. Well, here's breaking news. 50% of the country is always going to disagree with you.
Sure.
That is the brilliance of the design of America. It's also the aggravation.
Yeah.
But, tie it back to church. I grew up as a Methodist, and my belief in God and my prayer every day is, I think, what most people pray. Give my family good health and the folks I know good health, but take care of everybody and give us all a chance to walk the path that's lit for us by you, and just be better tomorrow than we were today.
So what's interesting to me about how you're articulating that is to go back to the opinion show versus lying. There is something there for me in thinking about what folks consume in media, which is social media, which is on TV, which is ads that are scrolling across however they're even listening to this. And there was a distinction where you made an agreement with the audience that what they heard from you was an honest reflection, whether the microphone was there or not, that you weren't, it was without pretense. And I think one of the things that is not often articulated enough is when you are watching a particularly political, ideological show, there is a pretense of, no, we're trying to be fact-based. And I actually have a lot more respect for those on either side of a political spectrum who are completely honest about their political spectrum, because I can consume that media through that lens and be better informed because of it. And
100%.
So it makes me think about, I keep using this expression about November 10th. So November 10th is the first Sunday after the election. And in our country, there's a decent chance we still haven't figured out who won yet at that point, which is the subject of a whole separate podcast. But when you think about where we're going to be at that point, I'm curious what you are expecting. Actually, here's the way we can do this. I want to play out a couple of scenarios around November 10th, because I think it's helpful for people to hear the ways in which the sky may not be falling, no matter which one of these scenarios plays out. So November 10th, to start with the most likely scenario, we actually still don't know who won. What are you expecting from people? What are you expecting that day to feel like as we, in that scenario, keep counting votes?
As long as there's no violence between November 5th and November 10th, I think it's going to be a little deja vu all over again.
Sure.
Because a lot of people, the majority of the voting population, will have a memory of the election of 2000, where we didn't know until the Supreme Court declared George Bush, W. Bush, the winner in December, how that was going to play out. And the last time around, it took 7 days before Biden was officially declared the winner, when Pennsylvania was sealed. So what people need to understand is it's not as simple as, I'm going to go vote and a nice lady's going to count my vote, and then in a few hours we'll know who won. Every state, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but every state has Republicans and Democrats, checks and balances, who keep an eye on their elections. Every state. The most red states have blue folks. The most blue states have red folks. Does it always work? No. But it's supposed to be checked and balanced the same way the federal government is.
Sure.
So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, the way Pennsylvania counts votes is different than the way Wisconsin or Michigan or Illinois counts votes. So Pennsylvania takes a long time. And if they take a long time to count those votes, then we could well be into Sunday, or maybe even beyond the 10th, as you were talking about, before we know. So, honestly, I'm cautiously optimistic that we will know by then. That doesn't mean we won't have a bit of the proverbial junk hitting the fan.
Yep.
but it does mean that we'll have an opportunity to know who won, and then we can adjust and go from there. I don't think there's going to be panic in the streets, and there shouldn't be. Again, it's the greatest country in the world, and you can't sit back and go, we're going to be fine just because we always were fine. You have to be actively involved. But what does that come down to? That comes down to turnout and actually showing up to speak your piece.
Yeah. So before we go there, let's say we do know by November 10th. If someone's listening and come that day, their proverbial team lost. They are someone who did participate. They are someone who was engaged. And at that point, they realized that their side came up short. In your experience, both as someone who's always voted, but also as someone who has been paying attention to the way that this conversation continues to devolve, what are you hopeful for the folks who are not going to be on a particularly winning political side that they do this time around from 2024 to 2026 or whatever sort of next mile marker you want to put in, compared to maybe some of the ways in which after previous elections, it felt like it was a bunch of adults acting like children?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you put it that way, because that's really what it comes down to. Everything that you try to teach your kids and my grandchildren, and everything, a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old is learning about how to behave in school is dramatically more mature than how politicians have acted and continue to act. And that part is, it just has to stop. It has to stop. So I lost my spot in your question, though. So what was your basic question about it?
Basically, I'm hoping, just to step out of it, what I'm hopeful you're able to say is if you lost, be a grown-up, and if you won, be a grown-up. Okay.
Yeah, I think the answer is, if you did end up on the losing side, or if you do end up on the losing side, take a deep breath. And don't just jump on Facebook. Talk to your family about what matters, and talk to your family about how you can continue to move forward and have the best life you can possibly have, because this election is not the end of America, regardless of the outcome.
Sure.
This election is an opportunity for a new beginning, or an opportunity for a restart, or an opportunity to really clear the pipes, clear the air on what's going on, and how we need to take part in it. I understand people are skeptical. I understand people are really beaten down. It's a perfect storm where people don't trust institutions anymore. They don't trust politics, so why would they vote? I'm here to tell you, it has never been more important to vote. All cliches aside, you hear it every election cycle. This election, it is dramatically important for you to vote. And not just for president. If people go, 300 million people and we got these two, you still need to vote.
Sure.
You need to vote for your congressional reps, your state reps, all the way down to your school boards. If your school board's elected, it all matters. And it's very simple to research it and do it. Please take part in the system we're blessed to have. Because the only way it ever gets fixed is if you speak your voice and actually make a choice. Including, by the way, to throw out the bums if you feel like they're the bums that are making it worse.
Sure. So really, I think practically, you are someone who has always advocated taking the time to research your votes, taking the time to understand the consequences of each individual decision you're making. But I also think it's helpful. One of the conversations I had with one of the pastors on here was there are folks who I fundamentally believe participating in this conversation is a stumbling block for them. That right now, because of the way in which the political conversation is broken, the way of how politics and religion intersect for certain folks is broken, that I actually can extend a lot of grace to certain folks for, like you said earlier, being confused or being scared. But I think what's helpful in what you just said is articulating that even if that's where you are, there are still ways for you to participate, even if you're, in this case, leaving the top of the ballot blank.
Right. And which you can literally do. I mean, if you can't bring yourself to make a choice for the presidency, you still vote and go through all the other offices, because the Congress, your state government, and your local government, and obviously your schools dramatically affect your life more than the White House does on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But the White House is all you hear about. So yeah, it's vitally important. And by the way, we all want a 60-minute solution. I want to be able to stream my favorite show, and I want a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then I want to move on to another show. Well, there's only one show here, and the show we call America. If we're going to fix Washington, and it desperately needs to be fixed, you have to start with the foundation, and the foundation is cracked, and we got to shore it up. Not one issue, all the issues.
Yeah,
and you got to have the right people in position to do it.
So I got two more questions for you. The first is one of the interesting trends, and you and I have talked about this literally for years, in how the overall media landscape has become so flat. Is the moments that break through, it actually winds up defaulting in a lot of cases to comedians. You have late night talk show hosts or late night cable news hosts who wind up getting expanded platforms in certain moments because of the ways in which everyone exists in an echo chamber before then.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think about all the different times after particularly tragic events in the country, the sort of leading social media item the next day is some comedian giving a statement about it. What I'm curious about, if that is the reality of where we are, there's certainly benefits to it. There's certainly benefits to folks who are able to give a little bit of sugar to make the medicine go down sweeter. But it also can contribute to cynicism. It can create this sense of, I'm going to make jokes about this thing, and that is going to be my way to participate rather than actually participating.
And the danger of that, as you stated, and we have talked about this, and the danger of that is your vote is your power. Your vote is your voice. Watching Jon Stewart or John Oliver, two of the most influential political voices of the past 25 years, and by the way, they're really funny too.
Yeah.
But those two guys, and posting on Instagram or TikTok or whatever about them, that's not a vote.
Right.
It might make you feel good. You might get a lot of likes. You might get a lot of follows. That doesn't change things. And to truly take part in the system and change things, you can consume that and make it part of it, but you've got to make choices for the greater good. Yeah, you're right. Your point is actually, it's a brilliant point. You got to be able to laugh. Because God, if you can't laugh at it at this point, we're really in trouble.
Right.
But in the process of laughing at it, you also got to stop, take a deep breath, and take it seriously enough to do something about it. Because, and I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but if you just give me 1 second to say this, because I thought about this in regards to the church, and I think it's a valid point. I hate the term low information voter. And when I hear people say, you know what, I don't want full turnout. I don't want everybody to vote. I don't want low information voters to turn out. Did Jesus Christ ever say that? Has anyone ever said in church, you don't know enough about church, so I don't think you should come? I mean, that's what we're talking about. We've got to get back to these foundational beliefs of the good in people, and everybody's opinion matters not on Facebook, but we have to listen more, yell less, and learn from what we hear. So
that's super interesting to think about. There are folks, I want to dig in a little bit to we got to get back to when before the sort of, I'll use 2007, where the iPhone gets rolled out as a mile marker for us.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to 2007, we were having better conversations because there was less places for things to devolve into comment sections, but things were still pretty broken. There's obviously, this was a country that we've had a civil war. Like, things have been pretty bad before. And I think when you talk about getting back to, I think there's both a idealism in how we describe how things used to be, but also there's some dangers in nostalgia because it winds up glossing over some pretty substantial problems. And what I think I'm curious about there is when the Fifth Estate has gotten this right, are you able to even picture how that can play out in 2024? Because I think about Cronkite saying we're actually losing Vietnam. That's a moment where the Fifth Estate actually gets it right. Is that even possible at this point?
No. Sadly, no. No, because right now the major usage of the media in regards to this election is who's going to call the winner, who's going to call the winner first, who's going to get a last-minute October surprise story or interview. There's too much of that and not enough of what built media up to be the watchdog. Politicians should be afraid of the coverage the media has. And I mean, a healthy fear.
Yeah. It
should keep them between the white lines. We need to find a way back to that as well. But the impact of the media right now, no. I'm sad to say it, but it's ineffective in moving the ball forward.
Yeah. I think about that McCain quote. I think it was on Meet the Press, where it was something like, he said something very similar, where it was like, politicians should not be friends with the media. And he like looks at the reporter. He's like, I don't like you, but your job is critically important. You remember that?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I loved McCain because McCain was the kind of guy who would look you in the eye and he'd say that. And the look in the eye part matters too. Because we need to have a sense of honor that we've lost in this country and a sense of courage. You talked about comment sections and things like that. Hitting send without looking somebody in the eye and saying something terrible about him couldn't be more gutless.
Sure.
To have the sense of honor, to do what's right and admit when you're wrong, that's a core American value, and we have to find our way back to that in politics, or the problems that we have are going to get bigger.
So the last thing I want to ask you about is going back towards this November 10th kind of idea. There are folks who have put an outsized level of importance in how an election will impact their lives. But what you've always tried to focus on for folks is actually the people who have put not enough of an importance on this. Broad strokes, fast math. I promise there'd be no math on this podcast, but you would expect about 25% of the country to vote for a lot of Republicans or majority Republicans, and about 25% of the country to vote for a lot of Democrats or majority Democrats. That's how thin the elections are going to be decided on. That's how thin the margins are. That's part of the reason why election coverage exists, is because of how polarized of a country we have become. Thinking about the folks who are going to decide these elections, people who vote irregularly, people who don't always participate, I'm curious, what are the messages you hope that they are taking into the ballot box? What are you hoping they're thinking about as they go to vote? Because I think what too often gets lost is that we all have agency here. And the current system, if you are someone who doesn't regularly vote, you actually have a ton of agency. And that's part of the reason why you keep getting texts from politicians asking you for donations.
That's actually true. Yeah.
So if I'm someone who is going into, I'll simplify the question. If I'm someone who's going to vote, what are you hoping I'm thinking about? Because my guess is you're not wanting me to go, let me just check every R box or every box that has a D after someone's name.
No, and unfortunately, a lot of people do that. There's people who will never vote for a Republican or a Democrat because they never will. That doesn't serve the greater good in any way, shape, or form. I'm sure you get tired of my hula hoop analogy, but I think it fits in life in a lot of ways, and certainly here. And that is an old story from the good folks at Alcoholics Anonymous about a man who was tired of drinking but wasn't quite ready to be sober. And he was whining about cleaning a neighbor lady's garage with his AA sponsor. And the AA sponsor was tired of him whining. So he threw a hula hoop down on the ground, had the recovering alcoholic stand in it, said, turn around and tell me what you see. And he said, well, I see the neighbors' houses, and I see this, and I see that. He goes, that's the only thing you should concern yourself with, because until you fix what you can see, it's none of your business in fixing anything bigger than that. Now, that's a little bit oversimplified, but the notion is real. Sure. You have to care enough about what's right in front of you and care less about opinions and scoring points and those big picture things. So what I hope people do is remind themselves how great this country is, and remind themselves what they want, not today or tomorrow or next week, but in 5 years for themselves and for their families and down the road. And spend a few minutes doing a little bit of research, get their sample ballots online, go through, and make educated choices to the best of their abilities when they go and vote and take part in one of the greatest privileges in the world, to be a voter in the United States of America. It's as big as it gets. And, one other thing, too, about the media. We talked about the fifth estate. I include the fifth estate because even though the fifth estate technically is bloggers and it's opinion makers online, that is media now.
Yep.
The fourth estate is journalism by profession as it was defined. But I'm talking about the need for the fifth estate, all of it, and all the communications platforms to be better. So that's the point of that.
That's good. The thing I'm most afraid of in the context of this podcast is not people telling me that, the politics were wrong, or that I didn't say a thing, or that I did say a thing. It's the amount of people who are going to listen to this and go, that was really important that you did that, and then not go vote. Right.
And it's a stem off that low information voter thing, because the voter with too much information can actually be more dangerous if all the information they get is wrong.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.
The Rouse Center for the Arts in beautiful Crystal Lake, Illinois, 815-356-9212, rousecenter.org. Our friend John DeCosta is teaching people how to be comedians. If it's something you always thought, man, it'd be fun to try that. John's got a new session of his comedy class coming up this fall. He'll be on to talk about that in a future Live from My Office, not too distant future episode as well. John also takes care of a bunch of comedy shows at the Row, like Lucy's Comedy once a month on a Friday night. They spin the audience around and put them on stage. The stage itself for the comedy is also on stage. You get the idea. And it's a great show. So look for that at the Rouse Center website. And Teachers Lounge Comedy with some great comedians who also happen to be teachers. That is a show coming up in September. You're not going to want to miss either. So get information on the Rouse Center School for the Arts, where John does that teaching, and for all of those shows as well. And don't forget, if you become a Row Now member, RAUENOW, you can do that right on their website. Become a Row Now member. You can save up to 30% off on tickets for all shows. The Rouse Center for the Arts, been great partners of the Steve Cochran Experience for years. RAUScenter.org, RAUEcenter.org, 815-356-9212. And for Richard Coranda and all the great folks that work with him and for him at the Row, thank you from me. Rouse Center for the Arts. Rouse Center, RAUE Center, CENTER.org.